And welcome to the UCF versus Navy preview show. The number 20 Knights will host the Midshipmen from the Naval Academy this Saturday, bright and early at 11 a.m. In Orlando in the Bounce House. Game will be televised by ESPN2. I am Brandon Helwig, publisher of UCFsports.com on the Rivals Network, and I am honored to be joined tonight by Mike James. He is the publisher of the Mid Report on Rivals. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Yeah, can you first just kind of tell us a little bit about your background? How long have you been covering Navy? Is this the program you followed for a long time? Kind of how far back do you go?
So I graduated from the Naval Academy.
Okay.
I graduated back in 1999. And after I got back from my last deployment, which was around 2002, 2003, I started watching more Navy football just because I could, because I was back home. And I started getting kind of frustrated with the nature of the coverage, because
Right.
when you follow an option team, it's just cliches after cliches. They're not built for third and long, that kind of stuff. So because I didn't like what I was seeing, so I decided to just start a blog. So I started writing a blog for a while, probably for about a decade, before Rivals reached out to me and said, "Hey, we want to start a Navy site, and
Okay.
you got your stuff." So that was back in 2016, and I've been covering it on Rivals ever since.
Okay. Now, and you're actually based in Florida, right? I was just talking to you. You live in the Jacksonville area, so this game is going to be convenient for you. So you're going to be in the Bounce House on Saturday, right?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, it's a much shorter trip than usual. Actually, the drive is about the same as the flight up to Baltimore. So I guess the trip's about as the same, but I can leave from my driveway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's dive in. We'll first talk a little bit about Navy football this season. I know that the record this season hasn't been great, but I know there's been some injuries. And then when you look at last week against Notre Dame, I don't know what to think about Notre Dame. They've had some really bad losses. They beat Clemson and ended up beating Navy last weekend by 3 points. In that second half, Navy really dominated. Right? It was, I think. Navy limited Notre Dame to, was it 12 yards in the second
Yeah.
half, kind of made the score closer than maybe it really was. But what was your kind of takeaway seeing that game last week?
It was kind of frustrating, because there's a lot of what ifs that go into that game. If you look at what Notre Dame tried to do defensively against the option in the first half, it really wasn't a very good game plan. It was kind of gimmicky. And when you have these gimmicky game plans where it kind of allowed Navy's quarterbacks they knew what read was coming before the play happened. So it allowed the play to happen really quickly, and they could run the midline option to the fullback. And you saw these huge plays that gashed them in the first half. And actually, towards the end of the second quarter, Ken Niumatalolo decided to go with an onside kick, just because he didn't want Notre Dame to be able to adjust, because he wanted to get another drive in with this game plan. Notre Dame played a lot better defensively in the second half, but so did Navy. You know,
Yeah.
Navy tried to bring pressure early in the game. They had a couple of bad luck penalty calls, some fortunate plays by Notre Dame that led them to kind of back things off a little bit, and they were just getting gashed through the air when they did. So in the second half, they just dialed up the pressure again, and it paid dividends. And I don't know if 12 yards is I mean, that's still pretty extreme even for that, but Navy's run defense is pretty good, and it's kind of schematically designed to stop what Notre Dame tries to do offensively on the ground. Those two things kind of combined for a pretty good half.
Yeah, because I was looking at the numbers. I think Navy's rushing defense is number one in the conference and number six nationally, limiting the opponents to 85.8 yards per game and 3 yards per carry. And that's clearly been, it's not just that game against Notre Dame. What is it about the Navy run defense that, maybe has made it so good this year? I know the name that I was thinking about, and I think a lot of fans remember through the years, was linebacker Diego Fagot, but he's obviously moved on. So what has it been? What's made the rush defense so successful this year?
I think it's just, well, one, it's just good coaching. It's prioritization in a lot of ways. The funny thing about Navy averaging, only giving up like 80 yards per game, that's even after they played Air Force. that's the number one rushing team in the country, and it's still that low. So it kind of tells you, non-option teams for the most part have struggled a bit. Brian Newberry is the defensive coordinator at the Naval Academy, and a lot of what he does involves, kind of bringing strange run blitzes from places you don't really expect, and it leads to like a lot of tackles for loss, a lot of tackles in the backfield, and plus just some good coaching, good discipline play, having good gap discipline. It's it's paid off. Now, the flip side of that is that the pass defense hasn't been very good at all,
Right.
and there's a lot of that is just due to youth. I think if you want to have a good run defense, I think to be able to play with that gap, if you're going to have to pick one and drill one for Navy, you stop the run first and foremost.
Right.
But there have been some issues more in the secondary that have kind of cost them. But yeah, the run defense is pretty legit.
Yeah, and did I read it correctly that I think Navy blitzed pretty much exclusively on every down, especially in that second half against Notre Dame?
Yeah,
Is that kind of what?
There might have been like one or two plays where they didn't, but yeah, they did pretty consistently. I mean, it was. I've never really seen anything like it. It was just, what, this is what we do, and we're gonna make you beat it. And in the second half, we didn't.
Yeah, is there a style of offense or a style of quarterback that the Navy defense seems to have more success against? Is it more of those, prototypical running teams that don't have as much of a passing threat? Is that sort of the advantage that Navy would have? Like UCF has John Rice Plumlee, and he's a running quarterback. His passing is okay. They have a very good rushing attack. Is this the sort of matchup that you think is a pretty good matchup for that Navy defense?
Not really. I think I think Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame is Notre Dame, so I don't want to say that Navy's a good matchup. But just strictly schematically, they're the kind of team that's going to bring in 4 tight ends and really try to go with a power running game, and that suits Navy pretty well. I mean, if you're going to it's not quite another service academy game, but if you're going to try to approximate that from someone, I mean, style wise, that's about as close as you're going to get. UCF is a whole different animal. Gus Malzahn tries to get like 75, 80 plays a game. It's very up tempo. It's very spread out. And especially with the quarterback being really the primary running threat on the team, it creates that different dynamic where you're not just looking at one guy getting the ball. If you look back at the SMU game for Navy,
I was bringing up the box score because I was watching the interviews that Navy put out on Zoom or on YouTube, and they were bringing up Tanner Mordecai kind of as the most similar QB maybe to John Rice Plumlee, but they're saying John Rice Plumlee is obviously a lot faster than Tanner.
But Mordecai still had like a 60-yard touchdown run in that game.
Right. He was the leading rusher. Yeah, I'm looking. He had 74 yards in that game rushing, and
most of that
threw for 336. Yeah,
most of that came on one carry, and it just it's not that Navy can't handle it. It just gives them one more thing to think about. So the aggression, you might have to dial it back a little bit, because especially coming in from the backside, if you can you run into simple zone option play, and you want to bring that backside pressure and tackle the running back from behind. But if that quarterback's a running threat, you really can't do that. So stylistically, it's going to be kind of a tough matchup for Navy. They're going to have to take some chances, especially it's most of the secondary for most of the year has been 3 sophomores and a junior, and they play better when Navy is able to get pressure on the quarterback. And so it's kind of a catch-22 where you want to have them sit back and not be too aggressive and leave them one-on-one. But at the same time, the best way to help them out is to force the quarterback, make the quarterback uncomfortable, force him to throw a little earlier than he wants to. So you kind of have to roll the dice, see how the game is going, and decide which path you want to take. So I think they learned that lesson a little bit against Notre Dame last week, between the first half and the second half. But UCF is a different animal, and frankly has better receivers. So it's a tough matchup.
Yeah. Since we're talking about defense, who are some of the names that maybe we're going to hear their names called a lot on Saturday? Are there who's kind of the leader? Are there a couple leaders of that group that have having a good season for Navy?
So the funny thing about the defense is that at the beginning of the year they kind of joked around that they were calling themselves the no name defense because, as you mentioned, Diego Fago graduated,
Diego's gone, and everyone knew who he was.
Forrest graduated, and the guys that media people like me always lean to get a quote, they're all gone. So it's more of a fresh faced bunch. But if there's one player that has really stood out this season, it's John Marshall, who plays the striker position, which is it's an outside kind of hybrid outside linebacker safety kind of position.
Okay.
He played wide receiver in high school. He's athletic. But it kind of he's able, because he has that ability. He's able to make plays in coverage. He makes a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage too. He gets after the quarterback. Had the interception last week. He does a lot of things, really in every phase of the defense. And he's really the guy to watch. If he has a good game, then Navy might have a chance.
Let's talk a little bit more about the offensive side. I know, I guess Xavier Arline was the starting quarterback. He was really the backup entering the season, and there was a season-ending injury to the starter. And I guess was that midway through the season when that happened? And I think in this last game, Arline, didn't he suffer a sprained ankle late against Notre Dame? So what do you know? Is Arline starting on Saturday? Is it the third string Maynor that's going to play? Does anyone know what we're going to see on Saturday?
Coaches are being pretty tight-lipped about who's going to start a quarterback, and that kind of makes sense because when you look at the difference between Arline and Maynor, they're stylistically two very different players, and so just preparation-wise, you might approach things a little bit differently depending on who's starting. Arline is the runner. He showed a little bit of an arm against Notre Dame, though, so I don't want to pigeonhole him.
Right.
He's definitely the more dynamic runner, and then Maynor is more of a passer, more of a north-south guy, running the ball. So they're being pretty tight-lipped. We're not too sure who it is. If you ask me who I hope it is, I hope Arline's healthy, mainly because we've already gone through two quarterbacks. We don't want to, we're running a little bit thin on the bench there, but yeah, the offense has actually looked pretty good under Arline. It would be good to keep that kind of momentum going, especially heading into the Army game.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how would you evaluate the offense this season? Has it looked better since Arline, moved into the role, or how would you, as someone who follows Navy football and understands, option and all that stuff, like I really don't. How has the offense looked this season, in your opinion?
Okay, I'm going to try to keep this as brief as I can.
Okay.
So one of the biggest problems that Navy has faced this year is that there is a big rule change about cut blocking on the perimeter.
Yes.
Where you can only cut inside the tackle box now. You can't cut out on the perimeter.
On the perimeter with the receivers, and
that's right. Yeah. And that has kind of killed the option in a lot of ways, because what happens is that if you can't cut a guy and get him on the ground, you're not able, when the pitch man gets the ball. It used to be, well, he knew the guys in front of him were on the ground, so he could just catch the ball and go. Now they get strung out a little bit because all these defenders are on their feet, and it's allowing time for these backside defenders to catch up to the play and make the tackle. And I think that a lot of the issues earlier in the season were about changing the offense to kind of account for that, where the offense itself was a lot more of a power game, running a lot of pin and pull, running a lot of power, fullback off tackle, that kind of thing, to make that more of the focus as opposed to a true option, could go any of three ways type of look. I think the coaches felt that Lavatai was more of a quarterback to kind of run that kind of an offense. Since Arline has come back in, it's been a lot more triple option oriented. And while you see the same problems in the pitch game that you would expect with the rule change, um, the rest of the offense has actually kind of clicked a little bit better. They're just more comfortable running this. You've seen it's actually run a little bit better. They've run some midline option where you can get the quarterback going between the tackles, and that has helped. It worked a bit against Cincinnati. So it's kind of a mixed bag. The finding a way to adjust um, to the new cut blocking rules. The other thing is that the offense is very young. Uh,
Yeah.
Navy has run for 2,437 yards on the season. Do you know how many of those yards came from a senior? -2.
Wow.
So and that's just from Maynor. He got sacked in the Cincinnati game, and that kind of ruined his rushing yards, and that's it. So
Okay.
every they ran the mids ran for 455 yards against Tulsa. Half of that came from sophomores. So there's a learning curve too. So there's it's kind of a perfect storm. The team is
Yeah.
they lost a lot of transfers in the COVID years. So it's a young team dealing with kind of having to change the identity of the offense, and it's been a struggle for most of the year.
Yeah.
But it's looked best when they've been able to approximate the triple option of years past.
Yeah. Besides the quarterback position and whoever starts on Saturday, who are some of the other players you would say to watch on the offensive side?
So the one player you would definitely want to keep an eye on is Daba Fofana, the fullback. He ran for 130 plus against Notre Dame. He was the beneficiary of that game plan that Notre Dame rolled out. It's been hard to get with the young fullback. It's difficult because there are certain reads that a fullback has to make of interior linemen and know when to cut and how to cut. And it's rare for a fullback group as young as Navy's to be able to adjust to the game that quickly. But he's gotten a lot better as the years worn on. And between him and Anton Hall, the two of them have actually done a pretty decent job. If Navy does go to the air, they actually have a few pretty good wide receivers, better than you would expect for a triple option team. Jaden Umbarker is a converted quarterback. He gets a lot of reverses. He's pretty good with the ball in his hands. He's made some good catches. Mark Walker had a touchdown catch against Notre Dame. He's got good hands. He's actually made some pretty impressive catches in considering how few opportunities he typically gets in a season. So they can make some plays in the passing game, but it's a little bit difficult because Navy's offense, if the option isn't working, it's hard to get the passing game working too.
Right.
Everything revolves around the option. So, but if they get the opportunities, they've been able to make the most of them.
Let's talk more, big picture Navy football. Obviously, tremendous success, over the last 10 or 12 years. I think, what was it, like 10 bowl games in the first 12 years under Ken, I'm going to butcher his last name. Numatalola. Okay, I said it real quickly so you don't know I bungled it. But I think it was 10 bowl games the first 12 years. This will be the third straight year without going to a bowl game, third straight losing season. You talk about the rule changes. COVID obviously had an impact. Can anyone explain? Why do you think there has been a downturn? Is it just the way the ball bounces, or I'm sure that's something that's been debated amongst Navy fans. Like, what do you think's kind of happened the last few years?
I think that the biggest issue right now is just that the team is so young. It's young on defense. It's young on offense. It's dominated by sophomores, and it's normal over the course of Navy's recruiting is different than
I was going to say, how much did COVID impact recruiting? From that standpoint, did it hit Navy harder maybe than another program would have?
I don't think it affected recruiting, but it definitely affected retention. So
okay,
what happens is Navy, the entire school is on scholarship. So Navy's not limited by NCAA scholarship limits because everyone's on scholarship. So they'll bring in 50, 60 guys in a recruiting class. And what you want from that group is you don't want them to start right away. You should develop that bunch over the course of 4 years so that by the time they're juniors and seniors, they have one job, they know that one job better than anyone else, and they can execute that one job as quickly as they possibly can. That's how service academies typically compete. Now, over the course of those 4 years, some guys see the writing on the wall and they see, you know what, I'm still buried on the depth chart. I'm not going to make the team. So there's some natural attrition that happens there. And guys say, well, I'm just going to concentrate on being a midshipman, or I'm going to go join the rugby team or whatever. Um, but what's happened with the current class, is that it wasn't the natural evolution of a class that happened. Guys were leaving, um, and a lot of the guys that were leaving were guys that would have been major contributors. They
Okay.
were leaving earlier in the process. I mean, there's starting linebacker at TCU transferred from Navy. Starting safety at Wake Forest transferred from Navy. Guys kind of
So that's the transfer portal, of which Navy cannot benefit from, but the
correct.
transfer portal is negatively impacting Navy in a bigger way than maybe a few years ago.
Yeah, it is exit only, and it's COVID was really bad at the Naval Academy. When the entire student body lives in one building, things were locked down because social distancing was pretty much impossible. And not just that, food. They couldn't have food delivered to them. It was really hard. And when you have a transfer portal where you can enter this, and you have other college coaches enticing you to leave while you're sitting there in lockdown, it made it really hard.
Yeah.
It hit the Naval Academy really hard, and they're kind of paying the price right now. You hope that next year the conference is going to look a little bit different. The team's going to be a little bit older. You think, okay, so maybe they'll be able to make a big jump, but patience is not really something that college football fans and boosters are known for. So it's there's been a bit of an uproar, but
yeah. So how is the fan base? How are they viewing Coach Ken? Is he kind of the success he's had that over a long period of time is it pretty much he can do no wrong and he can just he's the coach till he decides to retire, or are there some fans getting kind of restless and wondering if a change at some point should be made?
Well, there's plenty of restlessness. There's you can't losing stinks. There's no way around it. The problem though is there's a formula for winning at a service academy, and it takes development of players over 4 years, get these juniors and seniors ready to go, and you either believe in that formula or you don't. So it's, if you are too impatient and you don't really buy into that, then yeah, you're kind of squawking for a change. But if the problem with that line of thinking though is that if you lose Kenya Matalolo, who on earth are you going to replace him with? Because back in
there's not a whole lot of there's not really much of a of course the Paul Johnson roots in Georgia Southern and Georgia Tech. There's not who would you pull from that has experience? What other programs are really running the triple option outside of the existing service academies?
Yeah, there are guys out there. One of the guys that gets tossed around a lot is Brian Bohannon down at Kennesaw State.
Okay, because he was part of the Paul Johnson tree, right? Yeah.
But the thing about that is that when Charlie Weatherby was fired back in 2001 and they brought in Johnson was out there. He wasn't the right coach just because he ran the option. He was the right coach because he was the best available coach. He was out there winning national championships. And if you let a guy like Ken Niumatalolo go, you better be really sure that the guy that you're picking up is better than what you're letting go. And there is no one. And I actually like Brian Bohannon. I have no qualms with him whatsoever. But he's not out winning national championships. That guy is not out there where you can say what you get is better. And the thing about service academy recruiting too is that it's so insular. It's a game within a game within a game. Um, and because the three academies recruit each other so against each other so much, things like Kenny Matalolo's name has some cachet with recruits, and if you let that go, whoever you bring in is going to put Navy right at the back of the line, and
Yeah.
it's gonna the I don't think people appreciate the potential for the magnitude of what you're talking about if you want to let someone like Nimatololo go. So
Yeah.
I'm an advocate for patience, but I always am. It's very difficult when it's not just the last 3 years. 2019 was a great season, but you look at the 2018 season, Navy went 3-10. So fans are frustrated. Now the issues that year are different than what we see now, but the results are the same, and fans are frustrated. But it's going to take, I think patience is the best path here, um, but not everyone sees it the same way I do.
Yeah. As someone who obviously follows all the service academies, Air Force is the program that's had more success right now and last season. What's different? Why have they been successful? Have they had older players in the system? Is it easier schedule where they're able to pad some wins? Where Navy, they have to play Notre Dame, they have to play Cincinnati, they have to play maybe tougher teams in the American. Why do you think Air Force has been more successful of late and Navy has not?
Well, Navy. The American is a better conference in the Mountain
Yeah.
West. Now that only means so much. I mean, they're not complete scrubs in the Mountain
Yeah.
West, but I think the biggest difference when it comes to Air Force is that Air Force actually redshirted players, and that's kind of the dirty little secret that in the service academy world it's a big deal, but to the outside world no one really seems to care. But when COVID hit at the Air Force Academy, it looked like the Mountain West was originally planning on canceling their fall season. And when that
Okay.
happened, what the Air Force Academy did was they sent half their football team home, like literally home, and disenrolled them for a semester. Now, the idea is that when a cadet has some kind of hardship at home, they'll let someone say, "Okay, you need to go home to take care of mom and dad or something." So they'll allow for that. But the football team kind of abused that. They just sent everyone home, and so they did not lose the players that the Naval Academy lost. And they those players when they come back, it's like a redshirt, so they're a year
Hmm.
older. So Navy's out there playing with sophomores where most teams on their schedule, with these super seniors and guys with that year of COVID eligibility, a sophomore could be in his fourth year on the team.
Wow.
And
Okay.
Air Force, because they're more experienced, because they didn't lose those guys, they haven't seen really any kind of a drop off in terms of what the product on the field.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you about, there was an interesting publicity. I don't think it was good early last season. I think it was after that game with Air Force, Naval Academy Athletic Director Chet Glatchuk fired offensive coordinator Ivan Jasper. I was rereading some of the stories. It was like, that was interesting. What was your make of that situation? Because Jasper had been connected to Coach Ken for ages. I think back when they were, maybe players and had been such an integral part of the Navy Academy staff. And I even remember a few years ago when, his son was going through his health crisis and needed a heart transplant. And it
Yeah.
just seemed that was a bad look in my opinion, for the AD to make a rash decision like that. And then I guess Coach Ken had to, make a deal for him to remain part of the staff as quarterbacks coach. But how did everyone kind of react to that public spectacle?
It's it was bad, and I think that kind of goes back to what I was talking about the lack of patience. No one wants to be patient. No one, because the more you see something, I mean, let's face it, that was a pretty terrible showing offensively in that game. And when you're sitting with fans and boosters, and they're looking at this and just pulling their hair out, you feel compelled to have to do something. I think it was a rash decision, and I think most people, even in retrospect, agree that it was a rash decision. But at the same time, the offense still, had its issues. So I think that was kind of, those Surface Academy games. There's a lot more pressure on those, and when you turn in that kind of a performance in a game that is that important, um, the pot kind of boils over a little bit, and maybe decisions were made that shouldn't have been. It's good that cooler heads have prevailed, and to be honest, you know Jasper is listed as the quarterbacks coach in the on the roster, but
Official title.
yeah, that's a title. His
Yeah.
what he's doing day to day with the
Is
program is still the same. It's just
offensive
you want
coordinator.
that apple cart.
Yeah.
So it's there's it was a bad look, and frankly, I think the one place that it hurt the most was in recruiting, because once you see that, and once the other service academies see that, now they say, well, you don't know how long that staff's going to be in town.
Yeah.
Look what just happened. They're itching to pull the trigger on getting a new staff. You might as well come here, because you
Yeah.
might like Navy, but you don't know what you're going to get. So it had a lot of repercussions all around. But cooler heads have prevailed, and I think things have settled down a little bit. It's just a question of, okay, we've settled down. Now let's get going on the field.
Yeah. What is the Navy view of the American Athletic Conference today? Because I remember when Navy joined, I guess it was still technically the Big East. A lot of people at the beginning thought that was under the old BCS, that maybe the Big East / AAC would maybe keep their auto bid to the BCS. That didn't happen with the new setup. We're seeing UCF, Cincinnati, and Houston will be leaving after this season. I guess in comes Charlotte, North Texas, FAU, Rice, UAB, and UTSA. I had to write that down. I guess somebody's gonna forget all the teams coming in, but there's six. There's gonna be 6 teams coming in to the American next year. So is this the same conference that Navy wanted to sign up for? Are they still happy being members of the American, or is it just a situation where there's not really a better alternative? Would they ever entertain going independent? Like Army still is.
Oh, they're still happy with the American. I think the conference has changed. When Navy originally agreed to join the Big East, the Big East name still meant a little something. Historically, Navy and the Big East have always kind of played footsies with each other, because Navy was one of those original Eastern independents that were kind of historically aligned with those schools. But then, even joining the American, I mean, you just look at what happened was, and Army is starting to feel some of this now, is that once you got good as an independent, schools didn't want to play you anymore. It got harder to fill out schedules. And so Navy wouldn't have a problem scheduling a Penn State or a South Carolina or Ohio State on the top end. And they wouldn't have a problem scheduling some Sun Belt schools that liked playing Navy, because it brought, they sold tickets when they came and came to town. But it's that middle tier where no one wanted to play them anymore, because they wanted to win games. They wanted to go to bowl games, and it made no sense for them to schedule a loss. So the schools like Tulane, the schools like Rice, these are the schools traditionally that have made up most of Navy's independent schedules that wouldn't schedule them anymore. Well, they joined the American, they're back on the schedule. So it makes a lot more sense from that perspective. Plus, just with the way that college football is now, if you're not in a conference, you're not in the game. You're not part of the conversation. You don't want to get into October and November when conference races are what's in the news, when that's what's heating up, and you don't want to be stuck, playing Monmouth or something. No offense to Monmouth, but you know what I mean. It's like, if you want to be part of the conversation and not just a sideshow, you kind of have to be in a conference. And and Army's feeling it now, because they've had some schedule cancellations that have forced them to schedule like multiple FCS schools
I noticed that.
in a season. You think, okay, well, excuse me, maybe this is a one season thing. They just released next season's schedule. It's happening again. It gets harder to fill out these schedules when teams don't want to play you, and the conference makes sense for the caliber of schedule that Navy wants to play, and plus for recruiting. the American has been huge for Navy because they've been able to stay in Texas, which has always been the biggest, the biggest recruiting state for them. It's only getting bigger with half the
Yeah,
recruits being from Texas now.
exactly.
So I think Navy is still plenty happy with the American Athletic Conference, and I don't expect that to change.
Yeah, the Army Navy game in a few weeks will return to Philadelphia, which I believe is the longest running site in terms of host cities for that game. Was it next year? It's going to the Patriot Stadium in Foxborough, Mass. I think future years it's the Commanders Stadium in Washington D.C. Baltimore, MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. Those seem like kind of like the key spots. The reason I asked this is that Orlando put in a bid, I think, for the 2027 game. I read that Charlotte, Chicago, and Dallas, but I guess they don't want to move it too far from that northeastern footprint. Is that something that you follow? Because I know there was interest around the country to have that game move around. Did you kind of follow that at all?
Yeah, and I think there would be plenty of interest to move it to a place like Orlando. I mean, who doesn't want to go to Orlando? The problem is strictly logistics.
Is it the transport of the cadets and the midshipmen? I know I read where Orlando's bid said they would cover that, but I guess I don't know if that was bus trips or charter flight. I mean, that's a huge logistical nightmare.
Yeah, it is. You got 8,000 students and staff that have to make the trip. Yeah, it is a logistical nightmare, and you also have to factor in that the time of year is also when final exams are. That's part of the logistical consideration as well. I think that both schools are willing to go ahead and give it to a city like Orlando if the right circumstances pop up. But until that logistical hurdle is met, I don't. It's really hard to take it out of that sort of Acela corridor in the Northeast between DC and Boston.
Yeah, between all those sites, is there a favorite host city? Is there one that kind of is superior to the other? And they're all pretty much at NFL stadiums, but what is the favorite host site if there is one?
Philadelphia. I think the game benefits from having a close identity to a city. It's like moving the Rose Bowl around Pasadena.
Yeah.
The two things it builds the brand when you can incorporate the city and when a city feels ownership. Now, I don't mind every once in a while moving the game around. I was kind of a little taken aback by how much it's moving around. Other than Philadelphia, though, I think the city that does the best job is really Baltimore. They really have embraced the game, and they're used to hosting Navy games too, because Navy plays Notre Dame there on a regular basis. They've played Ohio State there, so they're used to a lot of that. And it's obviously an easy trip from Annapolis, but they also do a very good job hosting the game.
Last thing, we'll touch one more time on this game. I mean, this is a scary game for UCF. They went up to Annapolis last year and lost. I know there were injuries, and UCF was breaking in a new quarterback in that game. But, I mean, I think UCF knows, the kind of challenge they're getting ready for on Saturday. So if Navy is going to be successful and has a chance to win this game, what needs to happen? What do you want to see on Saturday?
They have to run the option, and it sounds like kind of a cliche.
Yeah.
It hasn't been the case that they've been able to do that all year. With under our line, they have been able to run some option. Now, in last year's game, if last year's game was played under this year's rules, UCF would have won, because a lot of the yards that Navy picked up came on the perimeter, came from their slot, and that may or may not be a possibility.
And they also blocked a punt that made a big difference.
Yeah. But if Navy can get the option game going, figure out a way to get those blocks on the perimeter, can hold on to the ball. UCF in last year's game, they only ran 56 plays, which for a Gus Malzahn team, that's unheard of.
Yeah, it's usually in the 80s, upper 80s, somewhere in there.
Yeah, if they can repeat that formula, then Navy has a shot.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate it, Mike. I enjoyed this conversation. I know the UCF fans will enjoy kind of learning more about Navy's football team and everything else. And thanks for your time. And maybe I'll see you in the bounce house on Saturday.
Yeah, you probably will. I'll see you then.
All right. Take care. Thanks a lot.